Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. On this episode, I have Adrian Sierkowski, and I love saying his name like that. And he is a good friend of mine. He is a cinematographer, gaffer, and all around pretty nice guy. And I appreciate his time for coming on the podcast and talking to me about light and how us as directors, we can utilize that in our storytelling. I do want to just mention, I don't have sponsors for this show, not like anybody would want to sponsor. But anyway, I do offer some feedback services over on Fiverr. If you want feedback on your script, in addition to if you need feedback on a film, I can also help you out with that. And so, yes, I'll provide links for those services in the description, as well as links to get in contact with Adrian. And yes, so I hope you enjoy the episode. We did have some issues with the microphones and audios. I was trying to record through Podcaster, which used to be Anchor, and we were having some technical issues. And we just switched it over to Zoom, which we should have started over there to begin with. But regardless, I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Adrian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's nice to be here.
So please, introduce yourself for all the listeners out there that don't already know you.
I mean, I don't think anybody actually knows me. My name is Adrian Sierkowski. I'm a camera guy out here living and working in Los Angeles, and I've been working in film since I was about 10 years old. So I grew up on sets, around sets. My dad did a lot of work before he died as a cameraman. It was called a lighting director or a lighting cameraman, basically, which comes more out of the British system of working. And he was, with me down in what was in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and he would shoot a lot of like basically stock footage for your nature docs. So not so much so it's set as a bunch of sand and some lions humping in the background, but when I was about 10, they started paying me to be around, and I started working as a T-boy. In those days, in that system, you have breaks for tea because it's English style, and I would make tea for the whole crew and serve it properly with little sandwiches and that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, besides learning how to properly make tea, what else did you learn?
A lot of colorful language. I mean, after that, we came back to the U.S. when I was getting ready to go into high school, and he started working. My dad started working in studios and doing commercials. This was a time period when both Food Network and TLC were really first starting as cable channels. So we did a lot of big studio shows on Betacam, like The Furniture Guys and Christina Cooks, which was a cooking show for WYDE, and bunch of just big studio stuff. And that's a time when HMIs and Kino flows are still exotic technology. So it was a bunch of big 10Ks and 5Ks up on grids with snoots on them and stuff on beta cams. And you're lighting the whole set to F11. You're putting hundreds of thousands of watts of light down, and that's I go there after school and start helping out, just rigging stuff and plugging stuff in and twisting knobs and dials and occasionally running a dolly through a cyc wall. So learn a lot more there about lighting and shooting and making things very flat and boring, I guess.
Oh, how cool, man. Yeah, you really got a sense of that, really the whole shift in, the old style of filmmaking, in terms of lighting, and then, through now with, you're seeing virtual production stages happening. And
oh yeah, and it's interesting. My dad died, unfortunately, and when he died, it was right when the Red One was going to come out, and I got the money from his death, and I sold the house that we owned, and I had the option to buy a brand new Red One 4K M sensor camera or an RE SR3, and I picked the SR3, which is probably a bad financial choice. I kind of was working in that time period where we went from film being this like pinnacle to 28 days later coming out and people saying, oh, the XL What Exists film's dead, and then the Red coming out and the Red What Exists film's dead, and now, many years later, still just totally surprised by the rapid speed of change you get on the camera side. And now a little bit more on the lighting side too. I mean, technology is just a relentless beast, and currently coming for a lot of our jobs.
Mm-hmm. I was going to save this question for later, but I am curious your thoughts on AI, and how do you think that will affect the cinematographer's job, at least, or will it?
I mean, you really don't have a cinematographer if you start doing everything in a computer. Um, I think that in terms of productions which have a human touch, the jobs are a little safe from AI. But the issue quickly becomes, once you've digitized all your actors, you have these avatars. You know, are you really gonna discomfort yourself on set for 12 hours a day, or are you going to just use these tools like Unreal, MetaHuman, and large language models like ChatGPT, and are you just gonna sit at home on your computer and make films? And that, if that can exist with us at the same time, then that's kind of a beautiful thing. 'Cause that opens up media more. But I think it's a very open question as to what happens to human stories when we start making everything in a virtual world.
Yeah. Now let's actually get right into the collaborative process between a director and the director of photography. So it's like, how do they work together to achieve a desired visual style and mood in a film?
I mean that every director DP relationship is some kind of marriage, either a good one or a bad one. And you'll find that different DPs and different directors all work different ways. I think in my ideal, I'm working with a director who has a very clear vision of what they want. Sometimes that might be storyboarded, sometimes that might be shot listed, but the director has a vision, and then you come in and you're able to add your certain spices to it, your certain style. You're able to say, hey, what if we did X, Y, Z? That's some directors. Other directors, especially not so much the directors, but agency people in the commercial world, it's much more of an execution. You're given on a TV spot, you're given very specific boards from the agency, and you're just executing them in the real world. And some directors I've worked with really enjoy just letting things evolve and become, and they don't really have a given specific dogmatic belief of how the film should be. And it kind of just naturally takes on a form based on everybody's contributions. But as a broad general rule, the director will have a pretty good idea what they want, and then you sit down with them and you go through that idea and you share your good ideas and your bad ideas, and you arrive at what this kind of almost living being of a film will be. And of course, there's issues of budget and time and all that stuff, but at its core, it's just two guys or two people sharing ideas back and forth, trying to make some kernel of film better.
Mm-hmm. And how can you use the role of lighting in storytelling? So, like, how can you use lighting to enhance narrative, to invoke emotions, and to even contribute to character development?
I mean, I think that we as a species are a very visual species. We interpret a lot of the world visually, and we all kind of have a certain vocabulary for light and for look, and that's built up throughout our whole lives and what we're exposed to. The media we take in and stuff, and so lighting in a film is one of these aspects that you can use to help direct the audience. Somebody sees, for example, a very bright, high key scene, like, oh, I'm watching a comedy. Or they see a dark and very chiaroscuro or very almost frightening scene, and oh, I'm watching a horror. And you have these kind of base reactions based on their shared experience, and then you start playing with them. Like, oh, maybe you're taking this bright, happy, peppy looking, high key comedy look, and you're making an actual horror film out of it. Or you're taking a dark, chiaroscuro look, and you're making a comedy. An example of that is a film called Death to Smoochie, directed by Danny DeVito, and I don't really know who lends that, unfortunately, offhand, but it opens up as this very noir, gritty kind of underworld type movie. And you have that expectation, there's mafia, bribes, all this stuff. And at the core, it's a dark comedy about a kids show at a giant rhinoceros called Smoochie and Robin Williams, who was a corrupted kids show host. And it's rip-roaringly funny, and the lighting and the expectations the audience has of that lighting helps heighten that comedy. So, when you're using light, you start playing with the audience, you start directing them in your own kind of way. You direct them to feel a certain way to see, to have an expectation. You direct them even as simply as look over here at this bright thing. And that's all light dependent. I mean, if you had no lights, you'd be staring at a black image and hearing people talking, and that's just basically radio.
Yeah, I learned the term volumetric lighting recently, and that's pretty much the example that you just gave is kind of like that godly beam of light. Sometimes, you could use it pointing at something or.
Yeah, I mean, God rays and volumetric lighting, that's more of a CG term. That deals with like ray tracing, that kind of stuff. But when you're lighting a film, you are choosing what is and is not important to show. And that could be just the actors and a little bit of the environment, so you know what they are. I mean, a perfect example is if you think of any bar scene in a film, you'll have your actors a little bit brighter than the rest of the bar, but the rest of the bar is still visible because for some reason you need to care they're in a bar. And you're using your lighting in that very simple situation to direct the viewer's attention to the brightest point of the scene. There's a really great study done, and I forget the college that did it, where it tracked users' eye movements in the film There Will Be Blood. And looking at where people are casting their gaze can show you how they react to both motion and light in any given long take scene. And you'll see that, their eyes go to bright spots of the image first, and then they go to, things that are moving. They also tend to go to the person listening in such scenes. So if you have two people, one's talking, one's listening, people will be watching the person listening much more than the person talking because the reactions are more important.
Yeah, the reaction tells them how to react.
Right. Right.
Well.
It informs them. I mean, one thing I absolutely hate in modern editing is this ping pong kind of bullshit that you get. Can I say bullshit on this?
You can. Bullshit. Don't worry. Yeah, of course.
You get this ping pong bullshit of editing these days in a lot of these movies where whoever's talking is who's on screen. And that's not using the language of cinema as well as you could, because we can hear without seeing. But if we can hear something and see something else, that helps build meaning that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Absolutely. Now, I did ask you right now the role of lighting and storytelling. I'm curious as to the role of color.
Color is like light. Our eyes are sensitive to color. We see color. And I personally feel that we look for difference in an image, so a great example comes from the film The Matrix and that sequence with the woman in the red dress where everybody is monochrome and there's one woman in a bright red dress. And of course, everyone looks at her because there's a difference between her and everything else. So when you're dealing with color, you have to start really paying attention to what's colorful in your frame because it might take attention away from what you want or add attention there. You also get into the notion with both lighting and both color of kind of having a palette. So, you can start defining characters and associating them with a certain color, or even stories with a certain color. There's a film shot by Chris Doyle named Hero, which goes very, very heavy into the color world. where each telling of the story is a different color. As you synthesize them into a truth, you go towards white or towards black, which is, the absence or the conjoinment of all color. So, like lighting or lensing or depth of field or color, all of these little aspects are kind of like spices that you're putting in to make your finished film, if you want to think of it as a meal, the finished dish. And no one of them alone really drives the film, but they all start adding little accoutrements, little embellishments to help generate audience reactions and direct expectations and also form quick associations, which is very cultural. You start associating a certain color with a certain character. So when you see that color, you can think, oh, there's some influence of that character in this scene. Same with lighting. You see this style of lighting goes with this style of movie. So I associate this scene with that other thing I saw 5, 6 years ago.
Mm. It's really being so intentional about something that the audience picks up on subconsciously.
It really is. I mean, you're trying to play a trick on people watching the movie, because if they start overly noticing the artifice, because everything in film is very artificial. If you start noticing the artifice, you kind of start putting up walls between the audience and the story, which in some films is very, very useful. Maybe you want them removed from the narrative, but maybe you want them engrossed. And you have to be very careful with how you balance all these aspects of cinema to get things to really read correctly and to get your point of view across. Because at the end, every film is almost like an argument. It's almost like a dialogue between you and a viewer, where you're trying to tell them a story that they will believe in, and they're consistently sitting there saying, "No, this is a film." But when you get it right, it works really well.
Okay, just to address the obvious, we had to switch out microphones and switch to Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, apparently the Spotify app does not like our phones or my off-brand earpods.
Yeah, unfortunately. But just to get right back into it. So we were talking about balancing aesthetics and practicality. And I'll restate the question. So it's like, how do you, as a DP, like approach lighting in terms of both an artistic vision and like logistical like considerations like budget and time constraints?
I mean, as a DP, you're paid to know how to balance those things. You only ever get so much time, and if you have enough time, you can do magic on very small budget. But if you have no time, then your budget starts going up kind of exponentially. Sorry. A great example of that is take your basic campfire scene that you have to shoot. Given enough time, you can shoot that over a couple of days, let's say. So you always have enough lighting from the sky at blue hour to expose the background, character, and have the campfire be there. And it's great. You spend 3 or 4 days. It looks beautiful and natural and amazing and wonderful. Something that Terrence Malick did a lot in the film Days of Heaven, shooting at these perfect hours. But most films don't have that much time. And so that's when you start having to throw budget at it, because now instead of shooting over 3 or 4 days, you're doing it over an hour or two. You have a giant balloon light, and you've changed your actual fire out for a flame bar that you can control, and then there's lights on some kind of DMX chase, actually making the flicker effect, and it starts quite quickly adding up. And a DP's job really is in that translation between what the intent is and what the physics of life are, what the reality is. And you kind of have to know when to fight for the time to do something and when to fight for the budget to do something, or figure out a whole different approach to the scene with the director. So you're kind of always stuck between the rocks of time and money, because at the end of the day, you might be able to get more money, but not necessarily more time.
And so we have talked about the collaboration between directors and directors of photography, but what about the, collaborating with other department heads? And so how do how does lighting interact with set design or costume choices?
I mean, I can give you an example from a short I just worked on. I worked on it as a lighting guy, as a gaffer, as opposed to a DP. But the DP on this particular short asked me to put a blue light onto a red wall. And I said to him, that makes black because there's no blue in the color red. So if you shine blue light onto it, it doesn't actually light anything. That's just kind of physics. So there's a certain point where reality gets in the way of intention, and you have to know what you're doing, and all the departments have to kind of synergize together. A very great DP, David Mullen, most recently known from his work on the marvelous Miss Maisel, did a film called North Fork years ago now, and it has a very desaturated type look. And there's a shot he spoke about where they have a very black and white American flag, and somebody asked him, "Well, how did you get the flag black and white?" And he answered, "They made a black and white flag." So, in the end, photography is just one of many different departments and lighting, all working towards a common goal. So you have to be very much so synergized together. You're in a diner, you want it to be bright and colorful like Barbie. Well, how do you do that? You don't do it with lighting necessarily. It starts with bright and colorful production design and bright and colorful costumes and bright and colorful makeup. And the light, if you look at these scenes, is very regular. You're not making lights hot pink to accentuate most of these scenes. You're doing it with the other departments. And so it's weird being a DP because you're often one of the later hires on most productions. The production designer has been hired well before you because it takes time to build sets and find props and all these things. And so you have to really work very closely with art to make sure you're supporting each other and not fighting back and forth. Because let's say you have a production designer who wants the entire film to have a cool look, but you hate the way cool looks on skin tones, and you try to do everything with a very warm look. Well, you two are fighting back and forth, and you're going to make basically a shit sandwich at that point.
I do love this shit sandwich reference
Yeah.
there. Um, but that does make sense though. I mean, everybody has to be in sync
Right.
and
I mean,
come to yeah.
right. I mean, the camera can only show what's in front of the camera. You put an Ari Alexa with Cook anamorphics in an empty white room, and you'd struggle to tell the difference between that Ari Alexa and an iPhone because it's nothingness at that point.
Something I'm curious about is lighting and a character's psychology. And so how could lighting contribute to portraying a character's, emotions and motivations in their inner world?
Oh God, if I had a quick run of the mill answer to that, I'd be a millionaire. But I personally tend to think in terms of repetition and in terms of building an expectation for the audience. So, good example would be you have a very happy-go-lucky character. This is all just hypothetical. And this character is always very much so lit in that kind of glossy, commercial, good-looking lighting. Then all of a sudden you come to a scene where it's very different lighting, be it backlit or side lit or chiaroscuro or contrasty or hard lighting or whatever the case may be. You've broken a repetition now. And so the audience is then primed to know that something has changed. And hopefully your lighting is building on what the actor and the director are doing, because you're really there to accentuate as opposed to overstate. I personally think that the photography should be like the amount of salt you add to your French fries. It should not be the main event. It should be a bit of a personal taste just to heighten whatever is going on in the other film elements.
Good point. Um, what do you as a cinematographer and director of photography want directors to know? Like to when approaching you, when communicating, their
What they
vision to
want,
you.
what they
Okay.
want.
Yeah.
Like, I think most DPs and most gaffers and key grips and production designers are generally far more experienced than any director, just because we work on more stuff. We do more projects in so many different realms, and we all have what my college anthropology professor called shamanistic knowledge, like secrets that we've gathered over years of failure, that we can give to you. But if the director doesn't know what they want, it just starts off an entire sequence of failure. Um, Personally, and maybe this might piss people off, I find directors who are too wishy-washy and not definitive enough in their mantra, their belief, their core need, to be the hardest to work with. Because yeah, I can sit there as a DP and figure out the shots for you and the lighting and whatever, but I'm not making your day rate. We all department heads, I think, need a person to steer the ship. That person should be the director who says something as arbitrary as this scene feels heavy, or as specific as this scene's done on a 21 millimeter at T56, so we have depth and we see the world around the character, and he's in hard light and the textures are insane. We all, as DPs and creatives, need that, because I don't think we're there necessarily to carry the production. We're there to enhance the raw creative power of amazing individuals who are, at the end of the day, our bosses.
Yeah, but it's the collective, kind of almost like the collective conscious of the film itself, of everybody, putting
Yeah.
themselves into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in your ideal world, you're all singing Kumbaya on 10-hour days, and it's just working. It's just, you're happy. All your ideas are planning out just right. You have the time and the budget. The producer is great. He's buying people drinks at rap. That's the idea, where you're all on the same page. But I mean, you won't always all be on the same page. And what separates good filmmakers and good crew from I think bad is when you can take a step out of your own ego and listen more than you speak, and realize, at the end of the day, we're making films or TV or commercials or whatever. We're not trying to save somebody's life in a car crash. It's not ever that dire. We're just trying to make something that looks pretty good.
Yeah. I do have some questions from Instagram for you.
Sure.
One of my friends, Mohammed, asks, "What is your definition of cinematic?"
Oh God. Cinematic is that which differentiates itself from non-cinematic. So what I mean by that is we are inundated by media all the time. Selfie videos, TikToks, reels, photos that you see on Instagram. And cinematic is that which is not that. It's that which speaks to you less in obviousness and more in metaphor. So I think that all filmmaking is like poetry, or a good meal. It's a lot less about the ingredients you put in and a lot more about the meaning you get out by certain combinations. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's an answer.
I mean, it works, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, like, because like we get down to it, there are very specific styles for things. Like we've all seen so much YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, both over COVID and now over during the strike, and just in our own lives, that we can see a cinematic image and define it as such without really getting into the nitty gritty of what that breaks down to. And I think that breakdown really is that it's just more bombastic than what we see in our daily lives. There's a certain level of I guess love and care or time or money put into an image that we see that makes it feel heavier and more impactful than this cute cat video or how to cook Julia Child's boof whatever or that OnlyFans video you watch on repeat secretly from your lovers and friends.
Sure. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of there's a obvious distinction between, you know, a TikTok video versus,
I
you
mean,
know,
it's like kissing. Like when you get down to it, kissing is a very simple action. Two lips together, maybe some tongue. But we can all immediately identify a good kiss from a bad kiss. And while the actual rubric we choose will be very personal, there's a universality of saying this is a better kiss than that kiss that I had in fourth grade with that girl Sarah I met with the red lipstick.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I would go for the food option, you know what I mean? Like that was a good slice of pizza, but that place had a real
Right.
shitty
I
ass
mean,
slice of pizza.
yeah. I mean, but people like you probably would have pineapple on your pizza and have some weird Chicago deep dish, and that's going to catch me a lot of flack. But deep dish pizza is a casserole.
Sure. Okay, so the next question is from Ryan, and he asks, so if you're filming a project, would you rather have a cheap camera and expensive lights or expensive camera and cheap lights?
I'd rather have a cheap camera and expensive production design because I mean, at, at the end of the day, you're seeing your art department a lot more than your camera. I'll give you a great example. My very good friend Andrew, who I've known for God going on now 20 years. We're gonna do a music video pretty soon, and his choice for the location is a street by his friend's house, and it looks like dog shit. It's just not a very good looking location. Um, and so we now have to struggle and get really good cameras and really good lenses and all this artifice to make up for that kind of bad location. Lighting is irrelevant in this because it's a day exterior. There is no lighting, there's no time, there's no permits. We're really stealing this production. And I wish to God that he just took the day or two or five as a director to drive around and find a better fucking spot. Because if we had a better spot to film at, it's more interesting to look at than a green wall and a highway. Maybe we would be spending, I think we're spending like $2,000 on equipment, you know?
Sure.
Lighting, there's a point with lighting specifically where you get into necessity, and this is something maybe to talk about that people don't understand, is that new lights like the apertures and the Sarah tubes, they're all phenomenal. They're amazing. But an aperture 1200D isn't going to do you much good if, for whatever reason, you need to put it back 400 feet away. At that point, they start becoming technical reasons of physics that you have to get at 18K. You know, I mean, it's the same with like, oh, well, actually, maybe I'll tell a story. Years ago, I was involved in a low budget production, and we had this wedding scene, and we were going to do it very small and quiet and whatever. And eventually, the director hated that location, so they picked a much better location. It's a beautiful ballroom. It had these 23 feet by 13-foot windows all around it, some of which faced east and west. And the thing with east and west facing windows is you have sunrise and sunset. So now, instead of this simple scene, interior, no windows, could do it with some china balls maybe, and some cheap par cans. We have this giant location, about 300 foot by 150 feet, with a Steadicam move. And to light it, to have consistency, we had to black out an entire 150 foot by 23-foot row of windows, which required thousands of dollars of black material. And then we had to rent what I call bebe lights, and they're giant 18Ks on a truck base with a crane on the top. It's a fourth floor location, so you can't really um, do stands. And those, we had to get 4 or 5 of those at about 10,000 a day. And then because they're so bright, now the interior is too dark. So now for film, we had to rent, I think it was something like 5 or 6 8,000 watt HMI helium balloons, each of which at that time took 10 cylinders of helium at $250 a cylinder per day. And so this choice of location added on about $150,000 to $200,000 per day of cost, and it's just one of those things where you have to really be careful about what you try to do, because you're always kind of beholden to this budget and beholden to this style you've established. And as a film progresses, you'll start getting into situations where your first ideas might not really work anymore.
Yeah, that's really something that a director needs to understand too. It's like
Yeah,
you might love this location, but you
yeah,
do need to consider, all these other logistical
yeah.
reasons
I
that
mean,
you should avoid it.
yeah, a DP and a gaffer and a key grip and PD as well are the point at which imagination meets physics. You know, um,
Good
there's
point.
only
Yeah.
so much that you can do before you start having to cost a lot of money with a given spot, or a given idea, or a given set. Um, and the hardest place to be is as a DP when you go into the line saying, "Hey, listen, the director wants X, and I have to now hire 20 more guys, have a pre-light day, have a pre-call, have a D-rig day, and you also have to call all these rental houses with insurance to get all this new equipment."
I mean, I get why a director might want to do, the location scout on their own, but I'm sure take your production designer, take your
I
DP,
mean,
like,
ideally, the director has gone out with the location manager and picked some ideas. And then after that, they bring in the PD, the DP, maybe a gaffer, but you don't always need that, and an AD as well. And they all go to these picks and say, well, this location is on a street we can't park anybody. It's an hour shuttle from the closest parking spot, and your 12-hour day now becomes 6 hours because of loaded and load out times. You know?
yeah, and we can't forget about time or sound either.
Yeah, yeah. I've done shoots where we're filming next to LAX, and every 4.5 minutes you have to hold for a fucking A380 flying over your head.
Gosh, yeah. So way too much.
Yeah,
But anyway,
it's you know.
yeah, yeah, 100%. So I mean, definitely something to keep in mind for all the directors out there.
I think
Um,
does that answer the question? I don't know if it answered the question or not. I want to go on a tangent.
I love tangents, but I do have something even just curious to like
Yeah.
kind of just talk about. And so something that I was thinking about recently. And so obviously like in the beginning, like very beginning days of film, like lighting was really just about it was like kind of just lighting like natural light, whatever was available, and even just like blasting just the
Yeah.
light to make it exposed, right? So I'm curious as to that evolution of like mimicking paintings, or even like or just being aware that you could paint with light.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that, there was a school of thought in photography called, I don't know if it was the Ashcan School or Pictorialism. We're going back to my college education now, which was a long time ago. Um, but I mean, first you had portraiture and painting for a long time, and then you had photography, which really struggled to establish itself as an art form. And motion picture photography kind of comes out of that. And there's this kind of really interesting dynamic you get between technology and artistry in both photography, but I think especially in motion pictures. In the very early days, the cameras and the film was just shit. You know, you needed to blast it with light to make it happen, but people kept improving it, and every improvement opened up new ways of making media, new creative ideas. Um, and we're still seeing that today with digital and like high ISO cameras, and even some of that evil AI stuff. Technology moves and makes equipment better or different, and that opens up new ideas on how to do it. So as you open up these new ideas and new abilities of the medium itself, you start playing around, you start fucking around. A great example of this is if you've ever seen the movie, what's that called? Cloverfield. It's called Cloverfield. All right. If you look at the film Cloverfield as a film, its narrative relies off the notion of linear tape recording, and how if you're taping over a tape, different things happen, you know? And that was a philosophy that was unknown to filmmaking, because you really couldn't tape over a film that was already filmed, it was already done. So technology kind of created this idea, this ability that in this film, which did pretty well, latched onto. I think it was actually very successful. One of the very few digital films that had to be shot on digital because it's so ingrained in the narrative structure. And so as we started getting new abilities and new technologies and new cool toys, I mean, we're filmmakers. We play with them. It's there's a monotony to filmmaking that I don't think anybody really talks about, where days can get very monotone and boring, and then you get this new cool tech. You're like, oh, what can this do? And you fuck around and find out, as they say.
Yeah. And what would be just something that you would want to talk about in this episode too? Because I think we're getting towards the end too with this
Mm.
whole free version of Zoom that I have. But what is something that, in terms of just this whole episode of just, light and the director, of something the director should know about lighting, or should know, how to just, what do you think?
Oh man, I mean, I haven't been a director since college, so I can't speak to directors. But for all the cinematographers out there, I think the most important skill to have is imagination and respect. Um, you're not God. You're not the be all end all of cinema, no matter who you are. I don't care if you're Deakins or whomever. You have to respect the script, the director, the people you're working with, and you have to, as a person making media in general, have the creative and imaginative ability to think of how you want it to be. In film, you're making a world. You are Zathura, you are Ozymandias, you are building this horror or heaven. And nothing's worse than a person not knowing what they want. So know what you want. Know what you believe to be the way to do it. And it could be right and it could be wrong, but it doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong as long as you know what you want. Because once you know what you want, everybody starts working towards that goal. And maybe you screw up, like Jurassic World Domination, or maybe you do great, like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that there's a very sad amount of ballsiness to filmmaking these days. Um, I think that there's a point when I was younger working on film where you didn't know what the image was going to be at all. And so you took some chances just because you were too stupid or too good to know better. For my own career, I once underexposed some film by about 8 stops, and the director loved it. It was perfect for the shot. And from other careers, I'm sure that there have been DPs who have been like, well, I don't know, I might have blown out those highlights, or I might have really fucked up that contrast ratio, and it kind of works. There was a discovery in the dailies that we're kind of lacking now. So if you're a young filmmaker, be ballsy. Go watch Hunger by Steve McQueen and marvel at a 10-minute long uncut two shot of two guys talking in silhouette at a table. Go watch some stuff made by people who have no idea what they're doing, because I think the people who have no clue what they're doing make the most interesting choices. And don't be an asshole on set. Very important.
A lot of great advice.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. If anybody would like to follow you and get in contact with you and hire you, where can they find you?
I mean, yeah, if you want to hire me, just hire me. That'd be great. I'm very affordable. I don't care. Here's the thing too. As kind of a side note, you have to know your worth as a DP, but don't know your worth so much that you lock yourself out of new contacts and networks. But always fight for your crew to be paid what they need to be paid. Like a DP gets a lot of benefits even from a free show. A key grip, and a gaffer only get a bad back. Anyway, for following my Instagram, which is private, has a lot of cooking videos on it, is at Adrian Sierkowski, at ADrian Sierkowski. My website is my name, ADrian Sierkow.com. And yeah, if you want to talk more, if you're a young filmmaker who just needs somebody to bullshit with, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to share whatever knowledge I have. And if you need cooking advice, I have that too. Thank you, COVID and Strike. And yeah, go out there and be ballsy.
Can't forget, we can't end this without mentioning your poetry book.
Can
Go
we
ahead,
not?
mention it. Mention it.
Yeah, I wrote a book of poetry. It's on Amazon. If you look at my name, you can buy it. I don't think you should. It's very bad. There's a whole story with the poetry book and my very good friend Brett, and both of us being in bad places and trying to do something, but it is there. It has sold tens of copies. It's called A/B. And if you are a budding filmmaker, I highly encourage you to get outside of film a little bit, go into poetry, go into cooking or history or semiotics or painting, something that's not film. There's this kind of weird self blowjob that kind of happens in cinema that I think is kind of problematic, where a lot of filmmakers only look towards other film for inspiration, but you can find inspiration anywhere. You can find it in a recipe or a poem or a manga or Call of Duty or God knows what. I mean, I found one of my greatest inspirations for cinema in being dumped on a street corner by a girl named Christine. Not gonna say her last name, Christine, and that inspired me for years on how to do cinema because I was so emotional at the moment. I noticed so much stuff, but get out of film a little bit. Go do some other stuff. Go fishing. Play with your toes. Go off roading. I don't know. Buy a potato. Whatever you want to do, but look beyond film for what you want to have creativity from.
Awesome. And then just like really quick, one quick sentence about like a, everything summed up that you've learned through working in film and working with people all these years.
Try not to be an asshole, and don't be afraid of fucking up. You're going to. You're going to make mistakes. Just go with it
And learn from them. Absolutely. All right, Adrian, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
My pleasure.
Awesome. All right. And everybody out there, have great communication with your DPs.
Yeah.
And I hope this episode was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully the microphone changes, didn't screw up too much. And yeah, you guys have good.
I think they enjoy it now. They're like, oh, thank God, it sounds much better.
I mean, I wonder how many people are going to actually listen to my ramblings. But I mean, I guess it'll be a non-zero amount.
Yeah, definitely non-zero. I have at least, like you said, you'd had tens of buys of your book. I have a few. We have some a good amount of listeners. The most popular episode is the intuition and the director episode, which is always great,
Yeah, I mean, as a director, you have to have a little certain special something that I don't have because I hate directing. But directors need to have an intuition to really kind of control everybody on set in a weird way because you deal with a lot of personalities. Wait till you're directing as a young director and get to deal with a Teamsters captain. That should be your next podcast. How to deal with the other crew who are there for the paycheck and have been doing this longer than you've been alive podcast.
Yeah. That would be an interesting. Well, what'll happen? What'll have to happen for that is I'll have to be on that set, meet somebody, and then I'll have to ask them to come on. And so hopefully,
hopefully. I mean, give it some time. I mean, I have you coming out on a music video this weekend. Maybe you might be the Teamster.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yes, we'll see.
Need to respond. I have to respond to him with my drone footage examples. So,
oh God,
we'll see how that goes.
Good luck.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode of Film Directing with Matt Macedo. I'm your host, Matt Macedo. Thank you so much. Alrighty. Have a good day.
Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.